Chapter 1. The Birthday. That wasn't on the calendar. All right, let's pull up the historical calendar and rewind time. Way back, centuries before Christmas trees and shopping mall Santas, the world was already throwing massive, epic parties in the dead of winter. Think about it logically. The sun is at its weakest, it's freezing cold, and all the agricultural work for the year is completely done. You'd be craving a massive celebration too, right? This wasn't about one specific holiday. It was a primal human need for light, warmth, and community in the darkest time of the year. In the heart of the Roman Empire, you had Saturnalia, a total multi-day rager that kicked off around December 17th. This festival was absolutely wild by modern standards. It was a time of feasting, heavy drinking, gambling, and most shockingly, a complete flip of the social order. For a few days, enslaved people could talk back to their masters, and everyone celebrated as equals. It was chaos, but it was a controlled, celebratory chaos that the whole society looked forward to. Meanwhile, further north in the Germanic and Scandinavian worlds, people were celebrating Yule. This was a more solemn but equally important festival centered around feasting, the Yule log, and likely the god Odin's wild winter hunts across the sky. So, when Christianity began its meteoric rise across the Roman Empire in the 4th century, church leaders faced a massive marketing challenge. They needed to establish the birth of Jesus Christ as the central holiday. But they had a huge problem. The Bible itself is completely silent on the date. The nativity story in the Gospels of Luke and Matthew gives us shepherds in a manger, but not a single hint of a month or day. So, how did we all collectively agree on December 25th? The classic, most popular story you've probably heard is that it was a brilliant strategic move to replace and absorb these wildly popular pagan festivals. The logic goes, you love Saturnalia? Great. Now we have Christmas at the same time. You can keep the feasting, but let's point it towards Christ. It's a neat, tidy, and almost corporate-sounding explanation for a religious decision. And for a long time, everyone just accepted this as historical fact. But here's the plot twist that modern historians are focusing on. The evidence for this direct replacement theory is actually pretty thin. It's a compelling narrative, but the paper trail just isn't really there. So, what's the alternative theory? It turns out early Christian theologians were less concerned with pagan holidays and more with powerful divine symbolism. There was a strong belief in some Jewish and Christian circles that the great prophets of old were conceived and died on the exact same day of the year. They applied this idea to Jesus. Theologians like Hippolytus of Rome in the early 3rd century calculated that the Annunciation, the moment the angel Gabriel told Mary she would bear the Son of God, happened on March 25th. This date was also symbolically linked to the creation of the world. Now grab a calendar and count 9 months forward from March 25th. Where do you land? Bingo. December 25th. So, was the date chosen to directly compete with the Roman festival of Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquerable sun, on December 25th? Or was it a profound Christian symbol where Christ became the true Son of Righteousness, the light of the world, being born just as the days began to grow longer again? The historical jury is still out. It might even be a powerful mix of both, theology and real-world strategy merging perfectly. What we know for sure is that the first ever recorded celebration of Christmas on December 25th was in Rome in the year 336 AD. just as the Roman Empire was officially embracing Christianity. The date was set in stone, and a global phenomenon was born. But this was just the opening act. The date was set, but the Christmas party was just getting started. Fast forward past the fall of Rome, and we're in the Middle Ages. If you think your Christmas break is good, medieval peasants would have totally shown you up. We're entering the era of the 12 Days of Christmas, and this wasn't just a song. It was a legit 2-week-long social and religious marathon. From December 25th, celebrating the Nativity, all the way to January 6th, the Feast of the Epiphany, work basically stopped. The fields were frozen, and society shifted into celebration mode. This was the real Christmas season, and it was a much bigger deal than just the single day. Now this is where Christmas starts to get its signature mix of sacred and, well, let's call it rowdy. On one hand, you had the beautiful solemn church services for Christmas and Epiphany. But outside the church walls, things got wild. In England, a tradition emerged that would make your local town mayor blush: the Lord of Misrule. This was a commoner, often chosen by finding a hidden bean in a cake, who was crowned the king of the Christmas festivities. His job? To preside over the feasting and command everyone, including the actual nobility, to do silly, entertaining things. It was a sanctioned, temporary toppling of the social order, a direct echo of the Roman Saturnalia that might have independently sprung up to serve that same human need for release. And the party didn't stay inside the castle walls. Mumming was a huge deal. Groups of lower-class people, often young men, would put on costumes and masks, a practice called guising, and go door to door. They'd act out short plays, sing songs, or perform whatever entertainment they could. In return, they expected food, drink, or money. This sounds charming, but these groups could be intimidating and demanding. There's an old English carol where they sing, "We won't go until we get some," and they absolutely meant it. If you refused them, you might find yourself the victim of a mischievous prank. This tradition was so potent that it never really died. It just evolved and eventually found a new home centuries later, becoming a core part of a different holiday: Halloween. Even within the church, the spirit of reversal took hold. In a tradition called the Feast of Fools, lower-level clergy would sometimes temporarily take over, wearing their vestments inside out, leading a donkey into the church, and even burning old shoes instead of incense. It was chaotic, bizarre, and a way of humorously acknowledging the topsy-turvy world that Christmas represented. But amidst all this revelry, the core of the holiday was also being cemented. The Advent season, the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, became established as a time of fasting and preparation, creating a powerful contrast with the celebration to come. And in the cold, dark landscapes of Northern Europe, people began bringing in evergreen plants, holly, ivy, and mistletoe, as decorations. They were powerful symbols of everlasting life in the depths of winter, though the iconic Christmas tree was still a few centuries away from its starring role. This was the medieval Christmas, a long, vibrant, and often chaotic celebration that blended faith, community, and a healthy dose of sanctioned mischief. It was a holiday for everyone, but its very wildness was about to attract some powerful and disapproving critics. The medieval Christmas was a long, loud, and public party, but all that was about to come crashing down. Enter the Grinches of the 17th century, the Puritans. This is the chapter where Christmas almost got canceled. While some Protestant reformers, like Martin Luther, were totally fine with celebrating, others saw the holiday in a much darker light. To the Puritans in England and their counterparts in the American colonies, the Christmas they saw was an unholy mess. They looked at the 12 days of feasting, the drinking, the mumming, the role reversal of the Lord of Misrule, and they didn't see joyful celebration. They saw a sinful, pagan-derived debauchery that had nothing to do with the simple, scripture-based worship they demanded. Their argument was simple and brutal. The Bible doesn't command anyone to celebrate Jesus' birthday. Therefore, it was a human invention, and a corrupt one at that, invented by the Catholic Church and stained with ancient Roman paganism. They weren't just being killjoys. They genuinely believed they were purifying Christianity from superstition, and they had the power to act. When the Puritan leader Oliver Cromwell overthrew the English monarchy, one of his first moves was to ban Christmas entirely in 1647. Soldiers were ordered to patrol the streets and literally seize any festive displays they found. Shops were forced to stay open, and government business was deliberately scheduled for December 25th to send a clear message. This is just another working day. The public backlash was immediate and fierce. There were riots in cities like Canterbury, with crowds defiantly shutting shops and decorating doors with holly. It was a culture war, plain and simple. The ban was so unpopular that it was finally lifted when the monarchy was restored in 1660. But the Puritan disdain for Christmas had already taken root across the Atlantic. In New England, the Puritans were even more hardline. In 1659, the Massachusetts Bay Colony made celebrating Christmas a criminal offense, imposing a fine for anyone caught shirking work or feasting on that day. For decades, if you were in Boston on December 25th, you'd find schools and markets open as usual. Christmas was at its absolute lowest ebb. So, how did we get from this point to the cozy, family-centered holiday we know today? The answer is the Victorian era, and it was nothing short of a Christmas revolution. A powerful combination of factors brought it back from the brink. Writers like Washington Irving nostalgically described the old English Christmas traditions in his books, making them sound warm and charming. But the real game changer was Charles Dickens. His 1843 novella, A Christmas Carol, was a blockbuster that perfectly captured the new spirit the era was craving. It wasn't about public drinking or role reversal. It was about compassion, charity, family, and inner warmth. The story of Ebenezer Scrooge's transformation gave the holiday a new moral purpose. At the same time, Queen Victoria and her German husband, Prince Albert, were pictured in the illustrated news, standing with their children around a decorated Christmas tree. The royal family was trendy, and suddenly, every fashionable household in Britain and America wanted a tree of their own. This new, tamed Christmas, focused on children, gift-giving, and domestic bliss, was so powerful and appealing that it swept aside centuries of controversy and created the blueprint for the modern holiday we all recognize. Chapter 4. The Supersized Story of Santa Claus. Let's talk about the big man himself, Santa Claus. That jolly red-suited, reindeer-flying, gift-delivering icon is arguably the most famous fictional character on the planet. But his backstory is the ultimate historical mashup, a wild cocktail of saintly legends, pagan ghosts, and pure American marketing genius. So, grab some milk and cookies, and let's trace his epic journey. Our story starts not at the North Pole, but in ancient Turkey, with the original blueprint, St. Nicholas. He was a 4th century bishop known for his secret generosity, not his fashion sense. The most famous legend tells of a poor man with 3 daughters who couldn't afford their dowries, facing a life of destitution. Nicholas, wanting to help anonymously, snuck to their house on 3 separate nights and tossed bags of gold through an open window. Legend says the 3rd bag landed perfectly in a stocking, left hanging by the fire to dry. This single act of clandestine charity cemented his reputation as a protector of children and the poor. For centuries, his feast day on December 6th was a quiet time for small, secret gifts. But as his cult spread north into the cold pagan forests of Germania and Scandinavia, his story began to merge with local folklore. This is where things get murky and mythical. Some historians suggest his image blended with the Norse god Odin, who, during the Wild Yule Festival, led a ghostly, wild hunt across the winter sky on his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir. Sound familiar? Odin was also a figure who judged people, rewarding the good and punishing the naughty. These themes of winter travel and moral judgment would later become deeply woven into the Santa mythos. Then came the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. Reformers like Martin Luther were not fans of Catholic saints. They sought to dethrone St. Nicholas as the chief gift-giver. Luther's brilliant solution? Replace him with the Christ Kindle, Christ child, a divine angelic being who brought presents. This figure, often depicted as a blonde, angelic girl, became hugely popular in Central Europe. And when German immigrants brought the Christ Kindle to America, the name was mangled by English speakers into the familiar Kris Kringle, which ironically became just another name for Santa himself. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, the Dutch never gave up their beloved Sinterklaas. They pictured him as a tall, stern, bearded bishop in red robes who arrived from Spain on a steamship, riding a white horse. His helpers, the Zwarte Pieten, Black Petes, were a controversial lot, often portrayed as Moorish slaves or chimney sweeps covered in soot. The Dutch settlers brought this entire, fully formed tradition with them to the New World, to a place they called New Amsterdam, later known as New York City. And it was in 19th century New York that all these threads, the Dutch Sinterklaas, the Germanic gift-bringers, and the spirit of Old St. Nick, collided and fused into a new, uniquely American icon. The literary makeover began with Washington Irving, who, in his 1809 book, A History of New York, described a pipe-smoking, elfin Sinterklaas, flying in a wagon to deliver gifts. But the real game-changer came in 1823 with the anonymous publication of the poem A Visit from St. Nicholas, now known to every child as "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." This single text gave us the specific, magical blueprint: the jolly old elf, the sleigh, the 8 named reindeer, Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, Blitzen, and the iconic chimney entrance. The final piece of the puzzle was visual. In the 1860s, famed political cartoonist Thomas Nast, drawing for Harper's Weekly, took the poetic description and gave Santa his physical form. Chapter 5. The Evergreen Icon. How the Christmas Tree Conquered the World. We've arrived at the heart of the modern Christmas living room, the majestic, glowing, and gift-laden Christmas tree. Its story is a fascinating journey from obscure German church plays to a global symbol of cheer, fueled by royalty, nostalgia, and a human love for light in the darkest days. Let's bust a big myth right away. The idea that we directly took our trees from Viking Yule logs or pagan tree worship is more romantic internet fiction than historical fact. So, where did this iconic tradition really sprout from? The roots lead us to the German-speaking regions of Europe in the late Middle Ages. Here we find the paradise tree. These weren't Christmas decorations per se, but props for paradise plays, traveling religious performances that told the story of Adam and Eve's fall from grace. The tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden was conveniently represented by an evergreen fir tree, hung with red apples to symbolize the forbidden fruit. These plays were especially popular around December 24th, which was the feast day of Adam and Eve in some church calendars. Over time, devout Christians began setting up these paradise trees in their own homes as a private religious symbol during the Christmas season. The decorations evolved, becoming rich with Christian symbolism. Alongside the apples, they began to add white flat wafers known as oblaten. These represented the Eucharist, the body of Christ, and thus signified humanity's redemption from the original sin committed at the first tree. It was a powerful, tangible lesson in theology. The birth of Christ offered salvation from the fall of Adam. Later, other decorations joined the mix. Sweets, nuts, and eventually hand-blown glass baubles from the town of Lauscha in Germany. The first documented evidence of a modern Christmas tree comes from a 1419 Guild Chronicle in Freiburg, Germany, describing a tree decorated with apples, flour paste wafers, gingerbread, and tinsel. A famous, though likely apocryphal story involves the Protestant reformer Martin Luther. As the tale goes, he was walking home one clear winter night, dazzled by stars twinkling through the branches of an evergreen. Wanting to share this heavenly sight with his family, he cut down a small fir, brought it indoors, and placed candles on its branches to recreate the glimmering stars. Whether true or not, the story cemented the tree's connection to light and the Protestant faith in Germany, where it became a cherished domestic tradition. For centuries, it remained a mostly regional custom, but its global conquest was guaranteed by the ultimate influencers of the 19th century, the British royal family. In 1848, an enchanting illustration of Queen Victoria, her German husband Prince Albert, and their young children gathered around a decorated Christmas tree at Windsor Castle was published in the Illustrated London News. Victoria was the world's biggest trendsetter, and this image of domestic bliss and royal festivity went viral. Suddenly, every middle-class family in Britain and America had to have a Christmas tree. The timing was perfect. This new, family-centric Victorian Christmas we discussed earlier needed a physical heart in the home, a project for the family, a dazzling spectacle, and the perfect spot for placing gifts. While German immigrants had brought the custom to America earlier, the royal seal of approval made it explode into the mainstream. By the 1870s, Christmas tree lots were popping up in major American cities, and the tradition was firmly planted in the national psyche. From a humble prop in medieval religious drama to a must-have symbol of festive joy, the Christmas tree's journey is a testament to how a simple, powerful idea of life and light in the dead of winter can, with a little royal help, conquer the world.